statutory services, so social services clearly, GP, care homes, carers, other care services,
hospital
admissions, doctors, nurses, lots of different people to have fallouts and conflict with, really, and conflicts over things like. So some of the things I see in hospital are conflicts over things like do not resuscitate orders, and who makes the decision. Who makes the decision about what happens when people go home? So should they come home to their home? Should they go into some kind of care service? Or, what else is out there for them? And who makes those decisions and how they make them can often cause quite a lot of conflict. And there are times when people who have the majority of care are saying, this isn't a decision that I'm happy with or feel comfortable with. And that can be quite difficult for everybody involved. Care staff, the hospital staff, and the people themselves. And how much you involve the person receiving care in those decisions as well.
And you were talking earlier about there can often be an imbalance if one of the family members happens to be, say, a nurse or a doctor or a social worker. That can create an imbalance of power because they've got a natural language, they know the way the systems, the bureaucracy work.
It can be an advantage as
well. It can also be a huge advantage because they can navigate, And I think one of the almost the most important things for from the point of view of the service delivery person is just who is the main point of contact, because they won't want to think, right, well, I've got 5 family members I need to consult for every decision, and what if 3 want one and 2 want another?
And speaking of conflict, something we haven't come up, we've got 3 dogs here on the sofa, but actually that can be a conflict too when people have pets, and sort of who gets to look after Fido can be like a really big deal, and what should happen to them. Especially if someone's going into care. And quite a lot of care homes now allow some forms of pets, and quite a lot of areas do allow people to retain their rights over pets, but also who walks the dog, who feeds the cat, who does the goldfish, whatever it is, that can also lead to quite a lot of conflict. So I don't want to leave out all the diversity in this room, basically.
But also dog sitting and cat sitting can be really expensive, and it can be that particularly if, say, someone's in hospital for a couple of weeks, actually the financial burden of looking after the pets can be quite big, and that might be useful.
There are some great charities who will do it for you.
That is also good. Yes, yeah, and actually the charitable sector is a really good source of support for advice, and is a good place to check in with.
So I think the thing to do when you're thinking about statutory services is where you complain. In hospital there's a fairly clear complaints system. I would say it's clear, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest people don't know who to complain to or how. So the first point of call would be to talk to the person who's in charge of the area you're in. So the coordinator, the nurse in charge, whoever it is, consultant, doctor, anyone that you want to, but just to say, listen, I'm not happy with the service that I'm receiving or that my person I care for is receiving. And in hospital there's a kind of more informal route, which is PALS. So
that's the patient advisory liaison service.
Yes, and they can come along and negotiate and intervene and mediate if there's an issue that you want sorting out. You can go on to a formal complaints process, and there's a formal complaints process in the NHS. Social services, you go straight to formal. There isn't a kind of PALS service, as far as I'm aware.
And I think most local authorities have some form of complaint service or officer that you can go to. And hopefully, I think one of the general principles, everyone tries to resolve it fairly informally. So what is it that's going wrong, and how can you put it right immediately?
My view would be, don't be afraid to complain, ever. If there's something wrong, say so. Because I think it's worse if then afterwards you think, I wish I'd said. I wish I'd done something about that. Or something goes wrong and you had problems before it went wrong. Because sometimes you're the person who's advocating for the person you care for. You're the person that they're relying on to be there for them. And if they're upset or unhappy about something, or you're unhappy about something, the whole situation becomes a lot more difficult. And I think to have it sorted out as fast as possible is the kind of optimum.
And what should happen is, as the carer of someone, you should be involved in decisions and you should be involved in discussions, particularly if you're doing almost an advocacy role, if somebody's struggling to do that role for themselves. And it may be that they lack the ability to take part in those conversations, or just that they want another perspective. How is someone coping at home?
As professionals, though, I would also say there's a duty of advocacy on every professional. It's part of the code of conduct for every nurse. I'm sure it's part of the code of conduct for every doctor. We are there as our patients' advocates, so it's very important to understand that should be the role of the person looking after them in hospital or anywhere else as well, that they're there to advocate on the behalf of the person receiving care. And that can sometimes cause conflict, because they can sometimes perceive the needs of the person receiving care differently from the way the relatives do. And that can cause conflict. And it can be an issue when, for example, decisions about whether or not to resuscitate someone occur. And they can say to you, as a carer, that actually, if we were to try and resuscitate your mum or your dad or whoever, we would not be successful. And in our opinion, it's not the best course of action. They're advocating for their patient. They're saying that this is the best course of action for this person. But, sorry, Ripley, there's not enough space for you there. But what they're doing there is being their advocate, and that might be counter to what you want for your parent, because you might still think that they ought to be resuscitated. And I just want to make it very clear that being not for resuscitation doesn't mean that you're not for anything. It doesn't mean that the medical services have given up on you entirely. They will do everything up to the point your heart stops. So no care will change as a result of that decision.
And one of the sources of conflict amongst family members can be about what decisions of care are. So do not resuscitate is obviously a very extreme example. Equally, a very, very big example can be whether or not someone's able to live in their own home, or whether they need to go into sheltered accommodation or into a care home or a nursing home. And if different family members have different views on that, that can be really, really difficult to work through, particularly as people may have different perceptions on what that person would want.
Which is why in hospital we have something called a multidisciplinary team meeting, where everyone comes in, including the family and the person often, and they all make that decision together. And that will be mediated by a social worker, as well as hospital staff will be there as well. So it means that we have a proper decision-making process about what's best for the person themselves. And that should include their point of view as well. And we'll go on to this at a later stage, but it's all about advanced planning. Make sure that everyone knows what your views would be in those circumstances.
And if there's a disagreement amongst family members, you need to be able to resolve that as a family, because it can be really difficult if the team is trying to get together and they're getting different views from different family members. So one of the reasons it can be really critical that family members resolve that between themselves, it can be really hard for the multidisciplinary team if you have, say, 3 family members and they're all saying very different things about what the family wants or what's in the person's best interest. So sometimes, if it's possible for the family to be able to thrash some of that through, to then be able to come along and say, these are the views of the family, or this are the views of the carers.
And very briefly, if someone doesn't have anyone to speak for them, they can have what we call a best interest advisor appointed for them to enable them to have an advocate there.
Hello, I'm Dave Dawes. I'm the Learning Director at Future Care Capital. We're a charity that supports unpaid carers to give them the support and the tools they need to look after their loved ones. We're only able to do this because of your generous donations. Please give whatever you can using the support button on the website. Every £1 you give helps us make more and more courses and make them freely available to other carers just like you. Thank you.